Okay, we're going to begin our study and look this evening at Hebrews chapter 9, continuing our way down through the latter half of this paragraph here. Specifically, I'm going to try and move a little bit faster than I normally do. Verses 24 and 26 are reiterations in a great deal of what we've already looked at extensively. I know this chapter has been kind of wearing. There is a lot of incredible detail about not only the Jewish history and the Israelite historical accounts and events and how those transpire and connect with the timeline of Christ as the type, but I'm going to try and move a little bit faster just to these last three, or these, I should say, these three verses here, as they do in a great deal kind of summarize what we've already looked at. And it is important. I do not want to overlook them or understate them, because we know every word is inspired, and we are familiar with the fact that every part of this should be taken as seriously and as absolutely as possible. But I also do not want to err on the side of over, shall we say, analogizing or over metaphorically speaking on each particular topic. When it is clear that the author makes X point in his verse, we should simply state X point. This is something that was brought up to me, I remember in seminary, where a professor said, if the author means to make multiple points, it will be made clear in the text. If he means to make one point, that is the point, and that is it. It is fruitless to spend a great deal of time on trying to create points that don't exist, and dangerous for obvious reasons. So that is my goal, is to finish out this little section here. We looked last week at verses 22 and 23, which deal with the nature of the sacrifice, right? Specifically the animal sacrifices, and the fact that the whole purpose of the system is to be a type of Christ, and the text even states to a degree it cleanses, which poses us a number of quandaries, one of which is that how are we going to say that animal blood cleanses anything? It's been made obvious that it doesn't cleanse anything. We know there's no magical or ethereal power in animal blood that has any cleansing effect whatsoever. So how can the author make some case that God sees some aspect of the animal blood as cleansing? And to that degree, we have to not just look at some kind of ethereal power of blood, like some kind of vampiric nature. We're looking at a type that it creates. It's an example. It's a type, and in this case, it's a type of violence, suffering, and death. Right? I remember this. I mentioned this last week, and I thought differently how you might find individuals, and I'm sure there are many individuals who can kill any number of animals and have no feeling and no regret, no remorse, no understanding, and will go down arguing that it is amoral to kill a creature in and of itself. There's no moral repercussions to killing an animal. It has no eternal soul per se, in and of itself intrinsically. But even as that is made clear, even if you might be able to say, well, there's people to steel themselves against animal death, I guess we could say, for so many years, and they just become unmoved by it. Sure, that might be true, but put that in a sacrificial context, right? Where you're dealing not just with killing or hunt. You're not hunting. You're not eating this. You're not looking for animals to kill quickly and eat them. You're not raising them and destroying them for a specific purpose. You're not even just killing for the sake of killing. You're killing because you have a specific purpose to atone for sin. And that is significant enough. You lead enough animals by the rope to slaughter, and you do this 7 days a week. You do this 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 1,500 years. It is a massive, compounded exponentially statement of the nature of suffering and violence and destruction, and it is supposed to be unpleasant. It's supposed to be violent. It's supposed to be brutal. It's supposed to be the basest possible type of the suffering of Christ, even in its unpleasant nature. And we know that even this is a very small type, right? There is no way we could even remotely compare the suffering of Christ to the suffering of animals led to slaughter. But we still see what is the temporary permanent paradox, right? Which we looked at here. And you see in this passage, it's made pretty clear. The heavenly things are a better sacrifice. Christ entered into the holy places not made with hands, which we're going to look at. So here's verse 24. the understanding that instead of doing something repeatedly over and over and over again, and inflicting this kind of pain over and over and over again, it is a one-time event, right? It is a simple one-time event that takes place in verses 24 and 26. So really what we're looking at today is the temporary versus the permanent paradox. Moses being temporary. His sacrifice, his tabernacle, his altars, his instruments are all temporary, and Christ is not the fulfillment. He is the original, right? The copies are the earthly things. The copy is Moses. The original is Christ and the seed of God. So to that end, I'm going to look at verse 24. Translate this out here. And we will pick out some keywords here that are intrinsic to our interpretation. So you have a negative particle right here. OU, ooh, is no or not. For, you have your post positive, right? I'll move this, shuffle all this over a little bit. Ace into kera poita. This is poio is to do or make. Care is hand. So this is made or built with hands. Not for not into made with hands. Aseothin. He entered. Is it just a simple past tense, to come or to go or to enter into a place? He entered, past tense. Hagia Christos. Holy, or I should say, I'm actually going to insert this for a purpose I'm going to point out in just a second. The Holy Christ. Christos is Christ. That's simple enough. And go back up here, second line. Antitupa. Antitupa is, it's actually, you could probably pick out a little bit of that if you see the word antitype, or an antitype of some sort. This is where that Greek word comes from. It's a example, copy, representative. I put representative down in my other translation, but yeah, it's something like an example of something else. Tone, elethion. Elethion, excuse me. Representative of the tone, elethion, the true. That is quite literally the rough translation there. The correct, the true. All, but, ace, into, iauton, it. Iauton is it. Let me space this out so it looks better. But, to it. Ton uranon, the heavens. Actually, this is singular. This is the heaven. Noon, now. Next line. Emphronisthani. Emphronisthani. This is to appear in front of, to be before, to this is infinitive, so this would be to be revealed. We'll just go with that for now. To be revealed to the, we've got a to there, omega, that's to or in the prosopol, the face, tuotheo, of the God. Huper, on account of or because of, hemon, us. Simple personal pronoun there. Revealed to the face of the God because of us. So, a number of things we can point out. Right, so this is roughly translated, for not into the made with hands, he entered into the holy places. Christ entered in the holy places, which are, and I would actually probably insert that there, which are examples. They are copies. They are representatives of the true. But to it, the heaven. So he entered not into, right, here's our negative, not into the made with hands holy, which is an example of the true, but he entered into the heaven, singular. Now, here's your change of sentence, to be revealed to the face of God because of us. Okay, so we're dealing with here a clear indication of intercession, right? There's a sense in which he doesn't go to the holy place of Moses. He goes into the holy place that is heaven. He does not enter into the example. He enters into the original. And he does that now, present tense, now, to appear to the face of God on behalf of us, or because of us. So we can see a number of things here. First, we can see clearly made with hands, right? That's probably a singular, unusual word to be placed here. Something's made with hands. The holy is made with hands. And this is important. And this is something we looked at in verse 23. Nowhere is the author of Hebrews saying the tabernacle is not holy, or is it not sanctified, or is it not consecrated or sacred. He's just simply saying it has no effective redemption power. But he is still saying it's holy. The blood still cleanses, and the hands that or the tabernacle is still holy, even though it's made with hands. The example, the copy, right? That would be a key word here. How we understand this. This is probably not going to be an interpretive challenge, but this is most certainly a key point of this whole sentence. This is a copy. This is an example of the true. But to it the heaven now to be revealed. That's going to be important, right? How is it that we understand Christ being revealed, or he's made clear, made public, made very open before the face of God for us, because of us? So, this is fairly straightforward. Care anima. Let me get this separated here. Actually, be caro poieta. Pardon me. Hands to make. That's the verb to make, and it has a care beginning on the front of it, a prefix on the front of it that means the hands made it. Pretty straightforward. No great complicated thing there. It typically highlights something supposed to be temporary. In the Greek New Testament, it's used in many times in extra biblical literature, but you can look at it in what we have in terms of Scripture. Here's just three uses, right? Mark 14:38. This is 58. This is where Jesus is on trial. He's in front of the Sanhedrin. This is the night of his betrayal, and they're trying to bring false witnesses out. So he's standing in the temple, and the Sanhedrin are there, and the false witnesses are coming out, and they're trying to prop up a case against him, and the prosecution's trying to make up stuff. And you can even read that in verses 56 and 7. In verse 58, apparently the trumped up case they come up with is they heard him say, that famous stating that he did say, I will rebuild it, I will destroy it, the one that is made with hands, and I'll rebuild another not made with hands, right? Which, if that's your greatest crime, then your case is not very watertight. But regardless, it's made with hands, right? And the whole purpose of Jesus' statement is this is a temporary temple. Herod's second restoration temple is temporary. He will destroy it, right? And he did destroy it in AD 70, and he built a new temple not made with hands. He built the church, right? That is the temple, right? There's a permanent temple and there's a temporary temple, right? It's the temporariness of something made with hands. Ephesians 2:11. Therefore, remember at one time you were Gentiles in the flesh, therefore the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands, right? Same word right here, made in the flesh with hands. It's temporary, it's useless, it's outer or external only. It does not accomplish any objective spiritual goal. We looked at this a few verses ago in Hebrews 9:11. But when Christ appeared as the high priest of good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is not of this creation. Every use of this isn't necessarily negative, but it is temporary, right? Something that is holy, that is made with hands, is something that will waste away. It will not be holy forever. It will not be eternal forever. It will be wasted away. Not when it's made with hands. Clearly, every use of it, and I know I haven't cited every use of it, but I've cited 4 now that we have in front of us, it's a temporary nature, which means that God can absolutely use and create matter and molecules, make them technically holy and sanctified while on this planet in the form of the tabernacle itself, and use it as an illustration example of the true permanent seed of Christ, and then, of course, dispense with it when its purpose has been fulfilled, and it's no longer holy, it's no longer useless. It was interesting to me. A case was brought up to me recently of what believers would do if they discovered the Ark of the Covenant on Mount Nebo, or wherever Indiana Jones dug it up, if we found the tabernacle, we found the cross of Christ. You think of the Roman Catholic relics, right? They have the fingers of St. Peter. They have a splinter of the cross. And in their minds, those objects are still holy, right? They still have significant, sacred, magic power in them, even though it's matter, it's molecules, it's wasting away. And I would argue that those things have turned to dust, and for good reason. Even the Ark of the Covenant, wherever it landed, is now dust, and it was meant to be dust, and it should stay dust because it is temporary. Right? It was part of a temporary, made with hands holiness that was designed for a purpose of bringing about the original, which is in Christ. So it's temporary, it's earthly, it's not supposed to last. This is the opposite of what the Hebrews think, right? The Hebrew thinking of this day and age is it will last forever. The temple will always stand. The sacrifices will always stand. The customs will always stand. The Pharisees will always stand. There will always be an eternal sacrifice in the Day of Atonement. It is eternal. The holy place that we built with our hands is holy, and it will always be holy. It's the opposite of Christ-like thinking, right? It's the opposite of what his goal is, that he will absolutely tear down the quote-unquote holiness of the temporary stuff that was built down here. Now, let me go ahead and move to another one really quickly. So we see to be revealed, to appear in some way. I want to move down to this one here for just a minute. This verb. So the holiness that Christ enters into is not the temporary holiness, which is a copy. He enters into the heavens, which gives you a fantastic example. So here's your original, right? You have the holy. He entered into the holy. The one, now this one is not made out of hands, so we exclude the copy and we say, okay, so what's the true, right? But entered into heaven. There's your true. This is truly holy. This is eternally and forever holy, right? This is not made with hands. He entered into the original holy, not the example of the holy, and that holy is heaven. Why? So that he can be revealed. You say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. How is it that God can appear in front of God and be revealed in some way? And as you probably guessed, we're not dealing about in the nature of God as much as his position. Because as we've looked at in previous chapters, and I think I've got some cited in some commentaries here we're about to look at, there is a sense in which post-death and resurrection and the ascension of Christ, he took on a new position and light that he did not have prior to his incarnation. Okay? Not that his nature changed, not that his God-likeness changed in any way, not that his position in the Trinity changed, but he was given a new office and position in a royal and administrative sense that he was not gifted or given prior to his death and resurrection, and that is the nature of the high priest. And now the high priest appears, right? And it is present tense, right? As we see here. Now to be revealed, right? So previously it was not. Now it is revealed. So we're clearly not talking about the eternal state of the Son and the Father coexisting together. They were always revealed to each other in terms of nature, but this is the first time that now he is revealed as priest. Now he is revealed as the one who can personally intercede for you on behalf of the Father forever, eternally. So this is something that is made public and very manifest, very openly as of now, as of a certain fixed point in time. This is the opposite of the priesthood also. As a side note, I'll put this up here just for a minute. You think of this almost kind of as the contrast of the priests, right? The entire system of the tabernacle is to hide you from God, right? You cannot stand boldly before him. You cannot. You will be destroyed. Even Aaron is the closest he can get, is he can go into the Holy of Holies after the incense has fully enclouded the Holy of Holies and created this cloud so he can't really see too well in there. Then he's allowed to go in there and do his one job of atonement and immediately leave, right? There's no other access to God. Not that God hides from you, but that you are deliberately hidden from God for a reason, for your safety, for your well-being, because you are unholy. But that's the opposite of what Christ does. There's kind of a type and antitype here, right? He can go boldly into the Holy of Holies. He can walk in directly and look at God face to face and still intercede for you. Aaron can't do that, right? Moses can't do that. This verb is used a number of times. I believe it's used over 70 times in the Greek New Testament, so I'm not going to cite all of them here. I just cited two for reference. He appeared to many, right? Very public, very open place that at the end of Matthew, he appears openly. You have John, he will manifest myself to him. He will be made very clear in public. He who loves me will be loved by the Father. I will love him and manifest myself to him. Christ is open and public and very clear to those who are loved by the Father and who keep his commandments. Right? Aaron can't do this. Aaron cannot. He might be able to go before the Holy of Holies. He can certainly enter the Holy of Holies in certain circumstances, but he definitely is not doing this boldly or openly in a massive way, right? It is very safeguarded. Because even Aaron cannot look at the face of God. right? He is not allowed to see the face of God. The iconic tale of Moses comes to mind, right? Where Moses wanted to see the face of God, and even Moses is not allowed to do that. Aaron certainly much less so. But regardless, Christ can. Christ can see the face of God and appear openly and publicly to the face in front of God directly. This is a very common word, the face. The prosopon is the face. It's literally your physical face, or it can mean just the face of your building, the front of your building, something along those lines. Very common word, 71 uses in the Greek New Testament. Here's just a number of uses of it. Matthew 6, when you wash your face, right? Your fasting would be seen by others, but your Father who is in secret. My eyes have seen your salvation that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light. This is the word for revelation to the Gentiles, right? In the presence of the peoples. I'm sorry, here's the word, presence. Pardon me. I got confused for a minute there. Presence is the word. It's the open face of all the peoples. They can all see the salvation. James 1:23, if anyone is a hearer of the word, not a doer, he's like a man who looks intently at his natural face in the mirror, right? You can just use it to talk about as a metaphor of your actual face. So this is very simple, but arguably the most powerful statement of this verse. He's revealed to the face of God directly because of us, or on behalf of us, I should say. This word here is better translated on our behalf, because of us for some reason. So Christ previously did not enter into the temporary holy. He enters into the eternal holy. Why? So that he can be revealed to the face of God on our behalf. We're definitely dealing with the doctrine of intercession, right? Which I know we've looked at extensively in chapters 7 and 8. But here we are again, the doctrine of intercession, or the intercessory nature of Christ, as systematic theologians would like to call this. A couple commentators note the idea of intercession is we have two senses in which we understand the work of Christ, one of which is a one-time, I should put this, the doctrine of intercession is not the one-time sacrifice. Let me be clear, it is heretical on multiple levels, and we'll look at that here in just a minute, to argue that Christ's sacrifice is not enough. No one is arguing that. The one time in space and time that Christ came and physically, literally, in a matter of hours, died on a cross was enough atonement. There will never be need for further atonement. But what it is the continuous revelation and manifestation of that sacrifice to the Father. And that is an ongoing, regular, and eternal work that Christ takes on for all eternity. Right? He will forever stand before the Father as the example and seal and proof, and really effectively the mercy seat of the Father. Right? He is the reason the Father can show mercy. So he is always by the Father, and he continuously does that for eternity. One commentator puts it this way. He says, the work of Christ is seen as comprising two distinct phases. A, the sacrifice by which he initially entered the heavenly sanctuary, right? The sacrifice. And then B, his present activity in the sanctuary. Phase A is developed in 25-28, which we're going to look at here in a minute. Or next week, I should say, with special emphasis on the once-for-all nature of Christ's sacrifice. Phase B, the present activity of Christ, is less clearly defined as awaiting for the final triumph, priesthood, and most clearly, though not in this passage, intercession. So he says these are the three things that Christ is accomplishing at the right hand of the Father currently. He's waiting for the final triumph. He's accomplishing his priestly work, and which is, I would argue, the same as the intercession. The simple solution to the apparent overlap of confusion between these two phases would be to separate clearly Christ's once-for-all sacrifice from his continuing priesthood, but such clear-cut distinctions are alien to the author's more synthetic nature of expression, and this is important, even if it's kind of scholarly mumbo-jumbo, in which the two phases of Christ's work are seen as complementary and thus closely linked. In other words, he's saying it's not well defined what is happening between these two phases. You say, well, these kind of overlap a lot, the one-time thing and the eternal thing. You're absolutely right, they do. They aren't clearly defined. Intercession isn't clearly defined in Scripture. We just know that it is happening. Yes, absolutely, that's true. And there is a reason that we should say the author does not take the time to clearly define those things. It would be synthetic for us to apply a definition to that is not given explicitly in the text. Bottom line, we don't really know the fullness of the intercession of Christ. We simply know that he is currently at the right hand of the Father interceding on your behalf for in ways that we don't fully understand, right? As a father relates to his son, as a son relates to his father. One commentator puts it this way. This is Boyce on his systematic theology and the priesthood of Christ. The office of the priest is one of divine appointment. I'm not going to read this entire section because I believe I've got two different sections here, but I want to get a main point across. Christ corresponds to that of the high priest on the Mosaic economy. He's foreshadowed by it. We understand that. The epistle to the Hebrews sets this forth very plainly and explicitly. The priesthood of Christ, however, varies from that of the high priest in several particulars, talking about Aaron. Christ is perpetual, is in one person without successor, making one offering once for all. The offering is a one-time event. The intercession, as priest, he offers up the sacrifice, laying it on the altar of oblation, and through it appeasing the wrath of God, making reconciliation between God and man, and securing in its proper presentation the removal of guilt and punishment. But as the priest, he also intercedes with God for pardon or justification or other blessings for all for whom he died, in all respects in which his death is available for each. How's that for some lawyer statements for you? Very vague understanding, but it is true. He says he intercedes currently for pardon and justification or other blessings for which his death is available. But he is not wrong in making that statement. It does not cease with his life on earth, but he is represented as continuing as the ever-living high priest to make intercession for us. And he cites all these reasons for it, or these verses that show that. Well, we are not to suppose that he is engaged in actual spoken prayer before God. We are also not to understand by this the mere influence of his sacrifice continued without any further activity on his part. Okay? So, we might be able to trifle with this one, Boyce, and make an argument why this. You could argue with this one here. It is not unlikely, and it certainly would be a little bit of a stretch to say, well, you don't know how Christ communicates with the Father at the right hand of God. Or how you would even define spoken prayer before God in that regard. We're dealing now in ethereal heavenly concepts. We have no understanding of whatsoever. But the second half could be very true. We do not understand it as there's clearly some kind of further activity on his part that is actively happening now. Right? To which is due all the blessings to which his people attain. This intercession is for his people. And he says passages in Isaiah and Luke have been adduced indicating intercession, which avails in some respect for all men. Now, okay, this is more of a footnote to what Boyce is trying to communicate, but it's worth mentioning that he takes the time and say, well, you might be able to say some passages that Christ intercedes for all men everywhere and not just the elect. That's a hard argument to make. You can read Isaiah 53 and Luke 23, and we could get into a great deal of Calvinism here, but for the purposes of being succinct tonight, the benefits, I agree with Boyce at least as much as he says this is not an intercessory prayer. This is not atoning work. We're dealing with common grace right here. Absolutely, Christ may yet intercede for the common grace of man in some regard. If you might want to make that argument, but in Isaiah 53 and Luke 23. But again, that's kind of a speculative stretch. Now, I'm trying to move along here. I'm trying to do verse 25. And look at what we have here. So you see the same negative particle with a D attached to the end of it, a delta. This is not even, or not because of. Not even, ina, palekas. Or even, not even in order that, so that, palikas, many, or lots. Many, prospere, he may carry. Or bear. May bear iauton, a reflexive pronoun, himself. Osper, ha acarius, as the high priest. Move this down. Aki Arius, right? Arius is priest. Ark is the beginning, the top priest. This is the high priest. Eserkatai, he entered unto the holy, to ta hagia, to the holy, according to Hineoton, each year, or the years, in Himati, in blood. And you have this interesting word here, allotrio, foreign, strange, not his own, in some way. Strange blood, or foreign blood, in some regard. So, a couple key words here that we can see. In order that he may not have to do this many times, will be the most immediate translation, right? That he may carry or bear himself into the holy. We know this word. We're familiar with high priest. We understand that word fairly well. Probably the most immediate word is the years, right? The multiple years is how this word is translated, and what the blood is being foreign or strange or unusual in some way. And there's a number of statements we can make about this. The one is the most obvious one, right? Which is that the high priest does not bring his own blood to the altar. Only Christ does that. That's the first immediate distinctive we have here in verse 25. The priest of Moses' covenant cannot use his own blood. At no point can a priest use human blood. At no priest does any human being die to atone for sin. In the Old Covenant, even if millions upon billions of animals died, not a single human dies to atone for sin in Moses' covenant. And there's a number of things we could say about that interesting interaction where, like we looked at last time, by far it would seem superior to use as human beings a type for death and atonement than animals, right? If you wanted to really press the point of the grotesque and brutal nature of atonement, or the sacrifice that must be made for atonement, it would make immediate, at least surface level logic sense to kill something more powerful or greater or more close to the image of God than an animal. But we know that is intrinsically not happening for a number of reasons. One, because the priest is forbidden from bringing human blood in. He has supposed to bring strange blood in. I would speculate, as much as I'm allowed to speculate, that for the obvious reason is that no man may even simulate what Christ does on the cross in the Old Testament, right? It would be blasphemous to assume any other man could atone for sin. But the clear phrasing of this passage is pretty simple. High priests and priests generally had to re-sacrifice constantly over and over and over again with blood that is not their own. And that's the major point that the author is making here. The point being that the problem of the Mosaic covenant is it can only address actions over and over and over again. It cannot save you from your sinful human nature. It cannot remove you from yourself. It cannot make your heart any more or less clean than it already is. Only the actions are addressed, right? It is legalistic in nature. One commentator puts it this way. He said his offering does not need repetition like the Levitical sacrifices. He refers rather to Christ's entrance into the heavenly sanctuary and presentation of himself before God than to his offering on the cross. Let's see in verse 14. The sacrifice on the cross is described by pagan sufferer, verse 26, and is introduced as a distinct thought. The point is that, being once in the heavenly sanctuary, Christ is not compelled to renew often his presentation of himself there, since in that case it would be necessary for him to suffer often. Each separate offering would necessitate a corresponding suffering. So I want to move forward because this is all part of the sentence, verses 25 and 26 formulate. This is the second half of that sentence, in verse 25. I can make this fit. Epe, since ede, being bound or having bound or chained up in some way, Ialton, him, palakes, many, pathein, to suffer, hapa kataboles, from beginning, foundation, cosmu, the world. We would actually insert in English the definite article world. You can even see the period there. Nune de, but now, I can move this down. Apax epi sunatelia, one time, or singular use, hepi, upon, sunatelia, completion, or finality. Tone ionion. I'm trying to make this smaller so it all fit a little bit better. Of the ages, right? Eternity. Unto apathesin, unto to the cancellation. This is an unusual word to use for forgiveness. Hamartias, of sin. Des testusias, through the sacrifice. I'm trying to make all this fit. It's not working out too well. Come on now. The sacrifice, iautu, phanerophatai, of him having been revealed or made public, just like we saw in verse 24. Oops. So we have our immediate verb that's made very clear here. The obvious point is that he's making is that Christ does not have to suffer many from the foundation of the world, right? If we did make that kind of argument, it would say it would have bound him to suffer many from the beginning of the world. Epi ede. But since not having been bound many to suffer from the beginning of the world, but now, one time upon completion, finality or completion of the ages to the cancellation of sin. This is probably the most phenomenal statement we have right here. The completion of the to the ages, the cancellation of sin, forever the cancellation of sin, right, happens one time. And we must be clear about this. The intercession is ongoing. The one-time sacrifice is a one-time event, because the problem arises if we are to take this, and this is the point the author's making, is that if Christ's blood is not sufficient and you must keep sacrificing, then the only blasphemous option would be for Christ to have to continuously suffer over and over again for eternity. Christ would constantly and always be suffering the wrath of God on a scale we couldn't even imagine, frankly. If his blood is in any way not correct. And so you say, I do want to make this point because I'm trying to rush a little bit here. Why would the author bring this up? Why is the author taking the time to mention that the obvious logical point that we certainly would understand, right? Clearly, Christ hasn't suffered since the beginning of the world. Clearly, his death is a one-time atonement for sin. Why does that matter? It matters if the problem you have is Christ God? Or, as we see in the book of Hebrews, should we maybe go back to Judaism and keep sacrificing things? That's the problem the author's been addressing. Right, he's dealing with Christian churches who are concerned about either trying to partially or fully reintegrate with Jewish life and culture. And go back to the sacrificial system, go back to the priesthood. Make an argument for how, if Jesus was a sacrifice, but he was not the sacrifice. He might have even been the greatest sacrifice, but there's still the problem being that if you go back to a Mosaic or a Jewish or a sacrificial system under Aaron's covenant, you are in effect stating that Christ in some way, shape, or form was not enough, right? That his blood is not full. And so the author makes the point, well, then he's either God or he's a complete liar, because if he's a complete liar, then the purpose of your Christianity is invalid. But if he is God, then you're in effect stating that when you go back to Moses' law and the Aaronic priesthood, that you need to keep sacrificing in addition to Christ, which means apparently Christ has to keep suffering for your sins, right? Which is blasphemous on a number of levels. Firstly, because it would assume that Jesus is not divine, or he is somehow lesser, right, than Moses or Aaron or the Father in some way. There's any number of blasphemous statements we could make about this. But the obvious point is clear here. Christ's suffering is a one-time event. And that one-time event brings about forgiveness, or shall we say the cancellation of sin, to the end of the ages, the finality, the completeness of the ages, right? This is the opposite of Christ, the many sufferings. The many sufferings of the Aaronic priesthood and the animals they kill is the type, and Christ being the fullness, the antitype, the finality, right? Even if you want to make some kind of argument that the actual sufferings of Christ are contrasted to some degree with some finite sacrifice that can be made on this planet, you still have to deal with the fact that either Christ is not enough or he's lesser than the Father in some way. Those are the only two arguments you have left if you're going to go back to Judaism after being a believer in Christ. Because his sacrifice is the completion of the cancellation of sin for the end of the ages, for the completion of the ages, right? Having been done one time for the completion of the ages, right? His atonement is a one-time event. It also is fascinating to consider that even again, we have this statement, the end of the ages, come up again, which I've noted in other books that we've done. Paul uses this statement a lot. The author of Hebrews has used it a few times, that this is the final age. The church age is the last age. This is there's a finality to this age. There will be nothing that comes after Christ, right? There will be no additional age after the Christological church age, or after the age of Christ's ascension and proclamation, and of course administration as king. And for that reason, we might actually be able to make a really good argument that Scripture sees the present age and the age following after the events of Revelation as the same age. Just the events that take place pre his institution as full consummated king on this planet are still part of the same church age, and the future will be the church age. This will be the church age. It's all the same end of the ages, right? The last age began in 30 AD. Or 33 AD, if you want to be precise. The cancellation of sin. Last word I'm going to look at here. This is unusual. He doesn't use the word for forgiveness here. He doesn't use the word for atonement even here. He uses an unusual Greek word, athetasin. Cancel, to annul, to set aside. It was used in extra biblical literature as a legal word, right? A rejection of the case is kind of what this is. And the only other place you'll find this word is Hebrews 7:18. For on one hand, the former commandment is set aside. This is the ESV. It is annulled. It's canceled because of its weakness and uselessness, which kind of is clearly talking about forgiveness and atonement, but adds another aspect to the understanding of what Christ's death does. His one-time death on the cross, not talking about the intercessory work that he does continuously, talking about the one-time event, annuls sin. It cancels sin. It is set aside. It's dismissed, like a judge dismisses the court case. It's discarded, right? Consider how fantastic that statement is. The cancellation of sin is an idea that Hebrews and Israelites have been trying to fight over for 1,500 years. The whole emphasis of Mosiac Law and the Aaronic Levitical priesthood is God just doesn't cancel sin, right? He doesn't sweep it under the rug. It is a very big deal, and you should take it as a very big deal, to such a degree that you're prepared to go to any lengths to sacrifice whatever you have to be right with God. So for an author like the author of Hebrews to say Christ cancels sin is the most anti-Levitical thing you can think of, right? It's the opposite of Levitical thinking. John Gill puts it this way. This is said to be but once in opposition to the many types and sacrifices under the law, and agrees with his one oblation and once suffering. The end of his appearance was to put away sin, the filth of it by his blood, the guilt of it by his atoning sacrifice, the punishment of it by his sufferings and death, the penalty of the law, and in consequence of all this, the dominion of it by the power of his grace, and the very being of it hereafter. And this putting it away is signified by his bearing, carrying, and taking it away, by removing it as far as the east from the west, by finishing and making an end of it, by crucifying of the old man, destroying the body of sin, and by utter disannulling and abolishing it as a debt and as a law. And all this is done by the sacrifice of himself, by offering up of his body and soul an offering for sin. Right? This is all the one-time event of Christ. This is the opposite of what Jewish thinking has become. And I'm going to go ahead and close it there, right on time-ish, because verses 27 and 28, the final verses of the chapter, are really the gospel in a nutshell. And the author kind of brings everything back home. He's made his long, really 3-chapter argument about why it is blasphemous to return back to Judaism after being a believer in Christ. And he brings it home to the gospel. And we'll look at that next week. So for our purposes today, I'm going to say just simply the fullness of Christ's suffering shows the finality of the age, and the suffering of Christ accomplishes more than just the simple atonement of sin. I will go ahead and shut off this and